Hello and welcome back to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. The success of UKIP in the UK was far from a unique phenomenon in Europe. Across Europe, far-right and Eurosceptic parties such as Marine Le Pen's Front National topped the poll in France, as did the Danish People's Party in Denmark, who have run numerous anti-Muslim campaigns in their country. Elsewhere, the far-left Syriza won the vote in Greece after almost 5 years of crippling austerity in the country. However, the populist right and left did not win everywhere. In the Netherlands, the Party for Freedom, led by Geert Wilders, slumped into a surprising third place, while in Italy, the governing Social Democratic centre-left party saw off the challenge from Beppe Grillo's anti-establishment five-star movement. So what do the results mean for the future of the European Union? And will the European Parliament still be able to function with around a third of its MPs now calling for its dissolution? Joining me in the studio to discuss all this are John Palmer, former European editor of The Guardian, and Andrew Slaughter, Labour MP for Hammersmith and Shadow Justice Minister. We're also joined now on Skype by Jean Lambert, MEP for the Green Party, and Sajid Karim, who's a Conservative MEP for North West England. Welcome to you all. Well, John Palmer, let me start with you. I mean, how do you explain this phenomenon? In some countries, these far-left parties, anti-austerity parties, did well. In other countries, they didn't, even though those countries have also had austerity programs.
Well, you see, if you look at history, it gives us a clue as to why you've got a complex, bifurcated response, as we've seen from these elections. Frankly, after 1929, you had a period when there was a radicalization of political response, both to the right and to the left. We know that ended disastrously at the end of the following decade. So after this worst slump and financial crisis, maybe since before the First World War, that broke out in 2007, and not only hit the international banking system, but also the European monetary system, leading to an austerity policy that was completely counterproductive, created even worse unemployment, and has led to a kind of sense of social desperation. Now, some voters have been exploited by the extreme right. You've mentioned some of them. They're not all quite the same. UKIP is xenophobic and nationalist, but their co-thinkers elsewhere in Europe are even more extreme. The National Front is an anti-Semitic record, and you've mentioned Islamophobic parties. Beyond them lie open neo-Nazi parties. In Greece, Golden Dawn, in Hungary, Jobbik, who have their own paramilitary thug organizations, the Sturmabteilung of the 2014, terrorizing immigrants, attacking Jews, attacking Muslims, etc. But on the other hand, as you rightly say, we've seen a growth of the radical left. Syriza is, in my view, a very hopeful development. The Indignados in Spain have done well, and various forms of left parties have emerged quite strongly, especially in Ireland. The question now will be, how will the governments and the European Union respond to this challenge? Above all, how will they deal with the crisis which is feeding this sense of social despair?
Well, Jean Lambert, I mean, John has set out exactly the same questions I was going to come to you. The European leaders had a dinner last night. What do you think should come out of it? What should they be doing now?
Well, I think what they should be doing now is looking at a very strong sense of positive direction for the European Union. I think people feel, as John has been saying, that the European Union has been responsible in many respects for a reduction in quality of life in some countries. And therefore, I think what governments have to be doing is showing how they can move forward, how they can really work for the benefit of the people and the role that the European Union has within that. I think, however, where they risk getting stuck is looking very much, if you like, almost at the functioning of the European Union in technical terms, rather than actually what is the vision for it. What is the role that it's actually going to have, rather than the niceties of, I don't know quite how many committees or who sits where, but that, and they need to give us some commissioners that actually have got some positive ideas and are more than space fillers.
And Sajid Karim for the Conservatives. I mean, this vote was about austerity. It wasn't just about bureaucracy and feeling that the European Union is out of touch. It was about austerity. Your party, the Conservative Party, has been the architect of austerity in Britain. I mean, should it now change course?
Well, I think this set of election results actually has to be examined on a much wider basis than a very narrow focus. It goes without saying that quite clearly people have carried out a reactionary set of voting patterns here. When one examines right across the European Union, the whole set of results that have come out, you see that it is the extremes that have gained in the highest regard. And the reason for that is that people are feeling very dissatisfied with the way in which the European Union has actually responded. The fact of the matter is that the European Union has not lived up to people's expectations. It has not delivered in the way that it ought to have delivered, and there is a need for fundamental change of direction and a fundamental reform program of the European Union. If governments are not willing to recognize that, even after having received this message, then I'm afraid we really are on a downward spiral.
Andrew Slaughter, I mean, your party hasn't offered a referendum for British voters on the European Union. Should they now, as a result of all this?
I don't think, Jonathan, we should be mesmerised by the headline. There are some very upsetting trends, particularly the neo-Nazi far-right parties and what's happened in France. But I draw a comparison with what happened in the UK. Everybody, and I'm afraid that includes the mainstream media, the BBC, is saying UKIP, UKIP, UKIP. If you actually looked at what the net effect in a general election would have been, what happened last Thursday, it would have been a majority Labour government. The Conservatives in third place in a national election for the first time ever, and the Liberal Democrats were almost wiped out at the election and now imploding as a result of infighting. Similarly, across Europe, you have big wins for parties on the centre-right, like Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats, as well as the Social Democrats in Italy. And the last thing we need to do is complacent, but equally we don't need to panic. We don't need to panic.
What about a referendum? Should you now offer a referendum to
I think
British voters?
I think the position that Ed Miliband set out is absolutely right and clear, which is people are concerned about the European Union, and if there is further substantial change, there may well be a referendum. But the only reason the Conservatives have said have a referendum is that they're in trouble with their own backbenchers. This is an internal row within the Conservative Party. You know, there are many, many priorities in this country, cost of living issues. In my constituents, there are issues to do with housing, to do with jobs, to do with hospitals closing. Those were the issues we fought an election on and won. We got rid of the flagship Conservative Council in Hammersmith last Thursday on those bread and butter, life and death issues. Europe, I'm afraid, did not cross anybody's lips when I was canvassing them, even in the Euro elections.
Well, coming back to these other European parties, I mean, Britain is obsessed by getting out of EU or staying in. I mean, these other parties that did so well, either from the left or the right, are any of them actually saying we should get out of the EU? Their countries should get out of the EU?
Very, very few of them are actually on the left parties. If you look at Syriza, you mentioned in Greece, it wants to stay in the Union and it wants to stay part of the Euro, but it wants a radical change in the macroeconomic policy that the Euro area Conservative governments have followed. It wants a growth policy, it wants a sustainable investment policy, it wants a policy to reduce gross social inequality. There's a lot of echoes through Europe of the theme in the book by the French economist Thomas Piketty that we're living in a society with grotesque wealth and income maldistribution. So their concern is not anti-Europe, their concern is for a different Europe, maybe more Europe, but a different Europe.
And Jean Lambert, are you worried that the Parliament is now going to be paralysed because of all these people coming in who have a very different agenda from what we've been used to?
Well, I think that the challenge for the Parliament is to actually find a role in terms of the direction it wants to travel in, and not to spend. I mean, we need to take account of what's happening here. I think there are going to be a number of strands, because one of the things that has become clear, I think, in some of these election results is that the question about identity and what sort of Europe it is that we're actually trying to create and for who is part of this Europe, I think is going to be a big issue in this Parliament. And there'll certainly be things that will be coming up which will link to issues around free movement, which will link to issues around human rights. However, I think, too, we need to find a way which is a constructive way forward in terms of what is Parliament putting on the table. And we were beginning to see that to the end of the last European Parliament, where there was a really strong push to make sure that we weren't just in here saving the banks and saving the euro. We were actually, trying to protect the people too. And Parliament was being a very strong voice in that. I would really hope this Parliament can continue with that, as well as other challenges. Of course, climate change is one, but this issue of identity, I think, is going to be a running issue in this new Parliament.
And Sajid Karim, I mean, David Cameron wants to try and renegotiate terms of Britain's membership of the EU and then put that to a referendum. Do you get the sense that any of your colleagues, even the ones in conservative parties like your own, are willing to see a renegotiation just for Britain's sake?
Well, actually, we're not alone when it comes to a fundamental reform programme of the European Union. And in fact, a number of things have already been done in terms of the way in which legislation is to be brought about, the types of companies that are to be covered by that legislation, the role of national parliaments in the way that the European Union works. These things have already gone through the European Parliament, and they have been able to receive support from across the board. Now, when it comes to exactly where we are at this moment in time, I took particular note of the President of France's comments yesterday as he was entering the negotiations in Brussels. He said that there is a need for fundamental reform. We have echoed that. Indeed, the Swedish Premier has been on board in relation to that. We've received support to a limited extent, albeit, but support all the same from Germany. And I see that calls are beginning to widen. There is a recognition today that this cannot be business as usual. We cannot simply maintain the status quo when it comes to the European Union. We have to fundamentally reform it so that it genuinely does serve the citizens of Europe.
2017, when Cameron is offering a referendum, I believe there'll be elections in France and Germany. I mean, will they really want to upset issues just on the eve of elections in their own country?
Well, when it comes to the referendum issue, that is something that has been guaranteed, that if you have a Conservative government after 2015, then we will deliver that referendum in 2017. Quite clearly, I know the Germans have been quite open in many ways about their view on this.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. I'm sorry, Sajid, the line has gone extremely bad and crackly. We can hardly hear what you're saying. I mean, John, do you think that there will be a renegotiation for Britain's benefit by the other countries?
It certainly won't be the substantial renegotiation that the government is talking about. There could be a repetition of Harold Wilson's exercise as Labour Prime Minister in 1974-75, which was a kind of Cod Act renegotiation. Nothing really changed, and he came back and said, we've won, and he was able to get a lot of support from the Tory opposition and from the Labour Party and the Liberals for it. The situation today is that the Conservative Eurosceptics are breathing down Cameron's neck. They'll look at the small print. They're willing to throw some small concessions in the direction of the British, maybe allowing the British government to force workers to work more overtime and have fewer working hour restrictions, something like that. But on the big question of major treaty changes, he hasn't got a song, and I think he knows it. And I think that he's just gambling for time to get him through to see whether he'll win the next election. Because if he doesn't win the next election, this renegotiation won't take place until, at the end of the decade, there may be another big treaty, because economic and monetary union will eventually require a form of governance, a treasury-type structure to make it work. And at that point, there may well be the basis for a referendum and future negotiations. But I'm afraid all the signs I hear from Berlin, and certainly from what Hollande said in Brussels yesterday, indicate very little support for this kind of root and branch renegotiation idea.
And Labour is happy with the position as now? They don't want any changes at all?
I don't think anyone can be happy with the way the European runs. It is a bureaucratic organisation, but it always seems the Labour Party that you build alliances. You don't make ultimatums. You don't throw your toys out of the pram every time. David Cameron is a prisoner of his own party. He and George Osborne represent the the multinational wing of capitalism, if you will, part of which is they want open borders, they want trade. The majority of his party do not. They are little Englanders, just like UKIP. They want out. He can't square that circle. This is a rather silly fudge to get him through to the election. I don't think there will be a Tory majority government after the next election. I think there'll be a Labour majority government, and I think we'll get on with trying to get the best deal out of Europe in that way.
Well, so you'll come back now. I believe the line is okay. I mean, how is Cameron going to differentiate himself from UKIP and win back those voters who are normally Tory, who went for UKIP last week? I mean, what is the strategy that you think he should adopt?
Well, dealing with the first issue, sorry, where I got cut off, it was very interesting also to note that outgoing President of the Commission himself has conceded that there is plenty of room for negotiation and indeed for a special case for the United Kingdom. And as somebody who is involved at an EU level, I feel very confident that we can actually pursue that programme and we will be in a position to deliver on many aspects of it. Now, in terms of how we as a political party deal with the issue of UKIP, look, the fact of the matter is this: the United Kingdom today is, as a country, made up of people who generally do not and will not support extremist views. What UKIP were able to do here was to very cleverly package some very extreme views, but to make them look very centrist in terms of the way in which they were presented. The opportunity simply was not there enough during the course of this election to allow for those packages to be opened and looked at in minute detail. We now have the time between now and the general election to ensure that what UKIP have presented is minutely examined and presented to the people of the United Kingdom for exactly what it is. They provide all of the problems but none of the solutions. They are using language which looks quite attractive on the face of it, but as soon as you examine it, you see it for what it actually is. And I have no doubt in my mind that when it comes to the general election, the people of the United Kingdom will not, as they did in the European election, lend their support to UKIP.
I agree entirely with what Mr. Graham has just said. The trouble is his comments apply equally well to a large part of his own party. The right wing of the Tory party have just as objectionable views on many issues in relation to Islamophobia in relation to immigration, as I'm afraid UKIP do, which is why we're seeing a number of them now calling for pacts with UKIP.
But I mean, Ed Miliband made a big speech in Thurrock this week, which seemed to sort of give some way towards the UKIP argument. I mean, Miliband said that we must ensure people in public services speak English. Well, does that mean that you can't get a job in a hospital or in a cleaner or something unless you speak English?
I think Ed went to Thurrock because we want to win Thurrock. It's a target seat along with many others, and UKIP. He's confronting the UKIP issue directly on, but he's not pandering to UKIP in any way. What we've said about immigration is the issues are wages being undercut of all workers in the UK, and
you did make that point that I've just read out.
Well,
ensure people in public services speak English.
And not only should people speak English, they should be given the opportunity to speak English. My
that's
experience,
a bit different.
I think
you have a job, and then while you have the job, you can learn a bit more English.
I'm afraid that the excellent English as a second language courses, which are run both in private and public sector colleges in the country, have been cut to the bone. And that part of the consequence of that has been that people who are here and cannot speak English are unable to get jobs. Part of it has been that we're not attracting foreign students and the revenue they come into the country. These are Tory policies and they're extremely short-sighted.
Andrew, can I raise a question with you, though? I take what you say, and Ed Miliband's family has experience of being migrants to this country and fleeing persecution, so there should be a sharp awareness of these problems. But the Labour Party has got a bigger challenge, which is that it doesn't address the core issues of Europe itself at all. I saw the election literature for the European elections. The word European Union and what Labour wanted from it didn't appear. It didn't appear. This idea of omerta, silence, will somehow get the Labour Party past the challenge that the xenophobes and the nationalists are posing, I think is a big mistake. And there is an issue. Do we want Europe to tackle some of the problems created by globalization, where people feel the economy is out of anybody's control? Because that would imply acknowledging that on some questions we need more, not yet less Europe. Maybe there are issues that can be handed back to national parliaments. Though when I look at national parliaments' ability to vet legislation on European issues, I have to say it's pretty appalling. Only a fraction gets properly investigated now because national parliaments are not properly structured and equipped for that task.
I'm sorry, John, to cut you off. We've only got a minute and a half left, and I just wanted to give Jean Lambert a chance to say something. I mean, do you agree with that point that John Palmer has just made, Jean, that there should be on some issues more Europe rather than less Europe?
Yes, I certainly would. I mean, obviously, issues around climate change, issues about regulating financial institutions, the European Union has a big role to play on those, I think.
Well, that's something, Andrew, that we don't hear very much from Ed Miliband. He never says we need more Europe, does he, on anything?
I don't disagree with what John has said, that the positives about Europe need to be emphasised by all the parties, and that includes, because the Conservative Party leadership says it's in favour of membership, saying something along those lines. But you could say that about all the other parties, I think. It's given us peace, it's given us a lot of social legislation, and the European Union, I think, has raised the level standard of living across Europe as a whole. There are many positives there. But the issue was, and I'm afraid that politicians are guilty of this, people in my constituency want to talk about education, healthcare, housing, and the issues that affect them on a day-to-day basis. Those are the issues this coalition government are not delivering on. Those are the issues Ed Miliband needs to say to them, a Labour government will deliver on, and those are the priorities for us.
Well, we've now come to the end of this episode of Analysis. I'd like to thank my guests, and of course you at home for watching. Please tune in again for future discussions. And don't forget you can keep up with discussion by following us on Twitter at the address below on your screen, or by following Islam Channel Current Affairs on Facebook. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.